It was a quiet morning by the lake. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Birds chirped softly, and the water reflected the colors like a giant, moving mirror. The air smelled fresh, with a hint of pine from the nearby trees. For protagonist's name, this was paradise. This was the spot they had dreamed of for years, a small, peaceful lakefront where life felt slow, simple, and beautiful. Every morning, protagonist's name would walk along the wooden dock, feeling the cool water lap against their feet. They loved how the lake glimmered under the sun, and how the gentle breeze played with the leaves of the trees. It was the perfect place to think, to relax, and to escape from the noise of the world. Here, life made sense. But that morning, something felt different. Across the street, in the house that overlooked the lake, a woman was watching. Her name was Karen. She was tall, with sharp eyes and a face that rarely smiled. She wore a crisp blouse and a wide-brimmed hat that made her look like she was ready to inspect everything around her. Protagonist's name didn't know it yet, but this woman would change everything about their peaceful lakefront life. At first, Karen seemed harmless. She waved politely when they passed by. But there was something in her eyes, a kind of careful calculation that made protagonist's name uneasy. It was like she was studying every move, every little thing they did on their property. And then, without any warning, she started asking questions. "Is that dock yours?" she asked one day, her voice sharp and precise. "Yes," protagonist's name replied, trying to keep their tone friendly. "I built it last summer." She nodded slowly, like she was considering something important. "I see. Interesting." It was a small conversation, but it left a strange feeling behind. Karen wasn't just a neighbor, she seemed different. Too curious. Too interested. And over the next few days, protagonist's name noticed her staring more often, taking notes in a little notebook, and even walking slowly along the edge of her own property to get a better view of the lakefront. Despite Karen's presence, the lakefront remained magical. Protagonist's name spent hours fishing, reading, or simply sitting on the dock with their feet in the water. They loved the way the sunlight danced across the lake, creating little sparks that looked like diamonds. They loved the quiet, the solitude, the feeling that this little corner of the world belonged only to them. But paradise is fragile. And Karen was about to test its limits. It started with small things. One morning, protagonist's name noticed a small sign posted near the edge of the lake. It read, "HOA rules, lakefront access is restricted." Confused, they walked closer, trying to see if it applied to them. But the sign didn't give any names. It just stood there, silent and threatening, like a warning. "Who put this here?" Protagonist's name muttered to themselves. They looked around, but the street was empty. No one was watching except, maybe, Karen. Across the street, she stood near her window, her eyes following every move. She gave a polite wave, but there was something in her smile that didn't feel friendly. Days went by, and the sense of unease grew. Karen started showing up at the lake at odd times. She would walk along the shore, always polite, always smiling, but her eyes were sharp, always checking, always judging. She asked questions about the dock, the plants, even the way protagonist's name cleaned the walkway. It felt like she was planning something, but no one knew what. The other neighbors didn't seem to notice. They were friendly, waving hello or stopping to chat about small things like the weather or the best time to fish. But Karen's attention was different. It was focused, almost obsessive. And soon, it became clear that she wasn't just curious, she was trying to control everything about the lakefront. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the lake turned gold, protagonist's name sat on the dock, feeling the calm water around their legs. They tried to push the thoughts of Karen out of their mind, but it was hard. Something in her eyes had unsettled them from the very beginning, and now it felt like the peace of the lake was slipping away. "You're enjoying your lakefront too much," a small voice in the back of their mind whispered. "Be careful." And then, just as they were thinking that, a shadow moved across the street. Karen had her notebook out again. She was walking slowly, inspecting every inch of the property from the safety of her own yard. Protagonist's name watched silently, feeling a knot of anger and fear grow in their chest. It was hard to understand why someone would be so focused on a peaceful lakefront. But one thing was clear, Karen was not just a neighbor. She was a problem. And as protagonist's name would soon discover, she had the power to turn their perfect paradise into a nightmare. For now, though, the lakefront remained beautiful. The water sparkled, the trees swayed gently, and the air smelled of pine and fresh water. But in the back of protagonist's name's mind, a warning lingered: paradise could be lost faster than you think. And sometimes, the danger comes in the form of a polite smile and a notebook full of plans. The first chapter of the lakefront story had begun. What started as a perfect morning, with the sun rising and the water shimmering, would soon turn into a battle for peace, property, and pride. And protagonist's name didn't even know it yet, but Karen was watching, waiting, and ready to make her move. The lakefront might have been perfect, but the storm was coming. It started like any other quiet morning by the lake. The mist hovered above the water, curling like smoke from a fire. Protagonist's name loved these early hours. The world felt soft, private, and untouched. But today, there was a new sound: the crunch of tires on gravel. Across the street, a moving truck had stopped in front of Karen's new house. Boxes were being unloaded, stacked neatly on the curb, and a few strangers were carrying furniture inside. Protagonist's name watched silently, pretending not to notice, but something about Karen's arrival felt deliberate. She stepped out of the truck herself, tall and polished, clipboard in hand. Her eyes scanned the lake as if measuring it, evaluating it, making some invisible checklist. Then she smiled, a slow, careful smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that said, "I notice everything, and I will not forget it." Within hours, Karen had introduced herself to the neighbors. Her words were polite, almost charming. "I'm excited to be part of the community," she said. "It's such a beautiful area. I hope we can all get along." Her neighbors smiled back, welcoming her warmly. But protagonist's name felt the unease settle deeper in their chest. There was something behind that smile, a quiet confidence that made the hairs on the back of their neck stand up. At first, Karen acted like any new neighbor. She walked her dog, mowed her lawn, and waved when people passed by. But soon, her attention shifted. She started noticing every detail about the lakefront. The way protagonist's name arranged their chairs on the dock. The small garden along the edge of the water. Even the little rowboat tied carefully to the shore. She would pause, write something down in her notebook, and smile just slightly before moving on. Then came the first real warning. A week after moving in, protagonist's name found a polite note slipped under their door. "Please be mindful of lakefront regulations. HOA rules are in place for a reason. Karen." It was short, polite, almost friendly. But the tone felt sharp, like a knife wrapped in velvet. Protagonist's name crumpled the note, but the feeling lingered: Karen was watching. She wasn't just interested in the lakefront, she was inspecting it, planning something, and everyone else in the neighborhood didn't seem to notice. Over the next few days, Karen's behavior became stranger. She would appear at the edge of the lake at odd times, always polite, always calm, but her gaze was unyielding. One afternoon, protagonist's name saw her taking photos of the dock from her window. Another time, she was standing near the water, notebook open, pretending to sketch flowers, but the eyes were fixed firmly on the property line. Protagonist's name tried to ignore her. After all, it was their lakefront. They had every right to enjoy it. Yet, the feeling of being observed grew stronger. Every laugh, every splash in the water, every quiet evening alone on the dock suddenly carried a sense of risk. Karen had a way of making even the most peaceful moments feel fragile. Then came the whispers. Small comments from neighbors that seemed innocent at first. "Did you know Karen mentioned something to the HOA?" one neighbor asked casually. "She's very detail-oriented." Protagonist's name nodded politely, but the blood ran cold. It wasn't just curiosity, it was control. Karen had arrived with one goal, and slowly, she was gathering allies, information, and power. By the end of the second week, Karen had become a constant presence. She volunteered for the HOA, attended every meeting, and somehow, subtly, her opinions began to matter more than anyone else's. Protagonist's name realized that this wasn't just about a new neighbor moving in, it was about someone staking a claim over their life, step by step. Sitting on the dock that evening, watching the sun sink behind the trees, Protagonist's name felt a chill. The lakefront was still beautiful, still peaceful in the fading light. But the sense of security was gone. Karen's shadow loomed across the water, quiet, controlled, patient. And for the first time, Protagonist's name understood that paradise could be fragile not because of storms, but because of people. And Karen? She was just getting started. The lakefront had never felt the same since Karen moved in. Protagonist's name tried to enjoy the mornings, watching the water ripple in the soft sunlight, but something invisible had shifted. It wasn't just Karen's presence, it was the rules she seemed to wield like a weapon. The HOA, once a distant name on a letterhead, suddenly became very real. Letters arrived in the mailbox, polite on the surface but sharp underneath. Please ensure all exterior structures meet HOA guidelines. Violations may result in fines. Protagonist's name, read the words over and over. Every dock plank, every garden stone, every little decoration suddenly felt like it could be against the rules. They had always followed the rules carefully, but Karen's arrival seemed to twist them, turning small, harmless details into potential problems. It started with questions from the HOA. Simple inquiries about property lines, landscaping, and dock maintenance. But Protagonist's name noticed a pattern. Karen's name kept appearing. She attended every meeting, offered suggestions, and even sent emails referencing concerns about lakefront compliance. Neighbors noticed, too, but most of them shrugged. They had their own lives, their own routines, their own distractions. Only Protagonist's name saw the full picture. Karen was not just asking questions, she was building a case, quietly, patiently, and with precision. One afternoon, Protagonist's name received a formal HOA notice. It stated that certain items along the lakefront needed immediate adjustment. The note was vague, but the implication was clear: if changes weren't made, fines could follow. Protagonist's name felt their heart sink. They had done nothing wrong. Every plank of the dock had been approved, every garden bed planted according to the rules. Yet somehow, Karen had managed to make it seem like a problem. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the effect was powerful. The next HOA meeting made it worse. Karen spoke confidently, pointing out minor violations that most people wouldn't even notice. Protagonist's name sat silently, trying to keep calm, but the room felt colder, smaller. Whispers followed her as she left the podium. "That lakefront is a mess," one neighbor muttered. "She's just lucky Karen is watching." Protagonist's name clenched their fists under the table. It wasn't just the rules, it was the control. Karen was slowly tightening a grip on the lakefront, and no one was stopping her. Every small decision, every moment of peace, seemed to pass through her lens of scrutiny. That night, Protagonist's name walked along the dock, letting their feet skim the water. The lake was still calm, the moon casting silver shadows across the surface. But the sense of freedom they once felt had vanished. Every reflection in the water reminded them of Karen's notebook, her careful notes, her invisible influence. The lakefront, once their sanctuary, had become a battlefield of rules and whispers. And Karen was winning, quietly, invisibly, methodically. For the first time, Protagonist's name realized that paradise could be threatened not by storms or accidents, but by people with patience, persistence, and a taste for control. And Karen had both. The rules were not just words on paper, they were tools. And Karen knew exactly how to use them. Sitting on the dock, staring at the calm water, Protagonist's name made a silent vow: if the lakefront was to remain theirs, they would have to fight not recklessly, but smartly. And the fight was only beginning. The morning sun broke over the lake, painting the water gold. Protagonist's name had hoped that today, like every other day, they could lose themselves in the calm ripples of the lake. But when they stepped outside, the feeling of peace evaporated instantly. A small crowd had gathered near the edge of the lake. Some neighbors whispered, some shook their heads, and some just watched silently. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Karen, smiling, clipboard in hand, calm as ever. In her hand was a new notice. This one wasn't polite. It was official, stamped with the HOA seal, and it made protagonist's name stomach drop. Effective immediately, access to the lakefront is restricted. Property rights along the shoreline are subject to HOA regulations. Compliance is mandatory. Protagonist's name felt a chill. The words were clear. Karen had convinced the HOA to take control. Their lakefront, their sanctuary, the place where they had spent countless mornings and evenings, was no longer fully theirs. How can this happen? They whispered to themselves, clutching the notice. I've followed all the rules. Karen, standing across the small patch of grass that marked the boundary, tilted her head. Her smile was sharp now, not friendly. Rules are rules, she said softly. We all have to follow them. Neighbors exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene. Some avoided eye contact, some nodded politely, and a few muttered excuses about needing to check their own lawns. No one stepped forward to support protagonist's name. It was a betrayal by silence, and it stung more than any confrontation could. For the first time, protagonist's name felt helpless. Every corner of the lakefront, the dock, the rowboat, the little flower beds seemed suddenly off limits. Karen had managed to take control without raising her voice, without breaking a single rule. It was cunning, calculated, and maddening. They walked slowly along the edge of the water, watching the sunlight shimmer on the surface. Each step felt heavy, like the lake itself had been stolen. Memories of peaceful mornings, quiet afternoons, and the soft lull of the water now felt tainted. It wasn't just land. It was a part of their life, and Karen had taken it. That night, protagonist's name sat on the dock in silence. The moon reflected on the lake, but the glow felt cold. Karen's presence seemed to hover over the water, invisible yet undeniable. The realization hit, their battle was no longer just about rules or letters. It was personal. The lakefront had been a place of freedom, but now it felt like a prison. Every ripple in the water seemed to whisper Karen's name, reminding them that control had shifted. She hadn't stolen it with force, or noise, or threats. She had stolen it with patience, precision, and the quiet power of authority. But as frustration boiled beneath the surface, a spark of determination ignited. Protagonist's name clenched their fists and whispered to the night sky. You think you've won, Karen, but this isn't over. And with that promise, a plan began to form, a plan that would not be reckless, but clever. A plan that could reclaim what had been taken, not just for protagonist's name, but for anyone who had ever been bullied or controlled by someone like Karen. The lakefront might have been stolen for now, but the fight to get it back and to shock the neighborhood in the process was just beginning. The stolen lakefront had left a bitter taste in protagonist's name's mouth. Every morning, they walked along the water's edge, feeling the cool breeze and the shimmering sunlight, but the serenity no longer belonged to them. Karen's shadow loomed over every ripple, every flower, every inch of the dock. It wasn't just unfair. It was personal. And that's when the idea came. Protagonist's name sat at the kitchen table, a notebook open in front of them. Not the kind Karen used, with her neat handwriting and official stamps, but a rough, messy plan, a blueprint for reclaiming the lakefront on their terms. They sketched lines, marked corners, and imagined every possible outcome. The fence wouldn't be ordinary. It wouldn't be just a barrier. It would be clever. Surprising. Something that would make Karen stop in her tracks, and make the neighbors take notice. Protagonist's name wanted it to be bold, but also precise, a statement that said, "This is mine, and I won't be bullied." First came the research. Every plank, every post, every spike had to be measured carefully. HOA rules might have limited access to the lakefront, but there were loopholes, small technicalities that Karen hadn't noticed. Protagonist's name spent hours reading the fine print, noting every rule that could work in their favor. Next came the design. They imagined a fence that would look simple at first glance, blending with the natural beauty of the lake. But up close, it would be unusual, something that would catch the eye, make people talk, and most importantly, shock Karen. It had hidden details, clever angles, and a structure that made the lakefront feel private without breaking any rules. Neighbors started noticing something unusual. Delivery trucks appeared at odd hours, carrying stacks of lumber, rolls of wire, and shiny tools. Protagonist's name smiled politely as people peeked over the property line, whispering guesses about what was happening. Just a little home project, they would say, hiding the truth with casual charm. Karen, of course, noticed immediately. She walked slowly along the edge of her lawn, notebook in hand, jotting down measurements, sketches, and ideas. She thought she could predict every move. But protagonist's name had anticipated her attention. Every step of the fence, every post, every corner was designed to confuse and impress, carefully calculated to be legal, but impossible to ignore. At night, protagonist's name would sit by the lake, looking at the faint outlines of the fence taking shape. The water reflected the growing structure, and for the first time since the lakefront had been stolen, hope returned. It wasn't just about reclaiming property, it was about reclaiming control, dignity, and peace. The planning took weeks. Every detail mattered. The type of wood, the angle of the posts, the spacing between planks. Every choice was deliberate, calculated to achieve one goal, a fence that would shock Karen and the neighborhood alike. And then came the final detail, a secret twist. Something that no one, not even Karen, could have predicted. A clever element built into the design, subtle but undeniable, that would make the fence stand out not just as a barrier, but as a statement. It wasn't revenge. It was creativity, planning, and patience, the perfect answer to weeks of intimidation. By the time the sun rose one morning, the plan was complete. Tools were ready. Lumber was cut. Posts were lined up. And protagonist's name, standing on the lakefront, felt a rush of determination. Karen might have stolen the peace, the comfort, and part of the lakefront, but she had underestimated one thing: patience, creativity, and the quiet resolve of someone who refused to be controlled. The battle for the lakefront was no longer about rules, letters, or whispers. It was about action. And as protagonist's name picked up the first post, ready to begin, the neighborhood had no idea what was coming, and Karen had no clue how shocking the outcome would be. The fence wasn't just a structure. It was a promise. A challenge. A statement. And by the time it was done, the lakefront would never look the same. The morning sun glinted off the water, but this time, it didn't feel like the calm, peaceful lake it once had. Protagonist's name stood at the edge of their property, taking a deep breath. Today, the lakefront would change forever. Today, Karen and the entire neighborhood would see something they would never forget. The fence was complete. Not just any fence, but one that looked simple from a distance, blending with the natural beauty of the lake. But up close, it was a masterpiece, cleverly designed, unusual, and impossible to ignore. Hidden elements caught the eye in surprising ways, and every detail shouted one message: this is mine, and I will protect it. Neighbors started noticing almost immediately. People paused on the sidewalk, whispered to each other, and pulled out their phones to take pictures. They hadn't expected anything like this. Even those who had been indifferent suddenly felt drawn to the lakefront, curious, amazed, a little nervous. And then Karen appeared. Her eyes widened, her notebook forgotten in her hands. She walked slowly toward the fence, inspecting it from every angle, her polite smile gone. For the first time, she looked uncertain. This wasn't here yesterday," she said, her voice tight. She tried to sound calm, but her tone betrayed shock. How did you?" Protagonist's name stood tall, calm, and collected. "It's just a fence," they said quietly. "But it follows all the rules." Karen's eyes narrowed. She scanned the fence, looking for loopholes, violations, anything she could use. But every post, every plank, every subtle twist in the design was perfect. She couldn't find a flaw. She realized too late, she had been outsmarted. The neighbors were watching, their whispers growing louder. "Wow, that's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. She really did it." Karen tried to speak again, but protagonist's name interrupted gently, almost kindly. "It's not about rules. It's about respect." Karen's face turned red with frustration. She opened her notebook, flipped through pages of sketches and notes, and paused, realizing there was nothing she could do. Protagonist's name had anticipated every possible move, every complaint she might have made. And then the hidden detail revealed itself. A subtle design choice, almost invisible at first, became clear. It wasn't just a fence. It was a boundary, a statement, a clever surprise that no one, not even Karen, had expected. Gasps rippled through the small crowd of neighbors. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. And Karen? She froze. For the first time, Karen had no words. Her plans, her influence, her control, they had all been neutralized with calm, clever planning. Protagonist's name had not just reclaimed their lakefront, they had transformed it into a symbol of quiet triumph. Standing there, watching the sunlight dance across the water behind the fence, Protagonist's name felt a wave of satisfaction. Not vengeance. Not anger. Just the deep, satisfying sense that patience, creativity, and courage had won the day. The neighborhood had a new story to tell. Karen had met her match. And the lakefront, once stolen, once threatened, was now stronger than ever. As Protagonist's name stepped back, letting neighbors admire the work, they whispered to themselves. Sometimes, the best surprises are the quiet ones, and the ones you plan to perfection. And in that moment, the lakefront wasn't just property. It was freedom. Pride. Victory. The fence had been up for a week, and the neighborhood had not stopped talking about it. Protagonist's name walked along the lakefront, sipping coffee, and watched the reactions like a quiet observer. People stopped their cars, pointed, and whispered. Some neighbors peeked over their fences, others came to chat, complimenting the design, the clever angles, and the subtle surprise built into it. Even the kids were curious. They ran along the sidewalk, guessing what each twist and plank could do. "It's like a secret fort," one of them exclaimed. Protagonist's name laughed quietly. This was exactly the reaction they had hoped for. The fence wasn't just a barrier, it was a statement, and everyone noticed it. Karen, however, had not yet recovered. She paced her yard, notebook in hand, muttering under her breath. Her plans, influence, and control had been neutralized by something she hadn't expected: intelligence, patience, and a little creativity. Neighbors began noticing Karen's unusual behavior. She tried to act normal, waving politely, but her sharp glances at the fence betrayed frustration. Some whispered among themselves, quietly rooting for Protagonist's name. Others simply shook their heads at Karen's obsession. Protagonist's name started receiving unexpected messages from neighbors, praising their courage. "I've never seen anyone take on Karen like that," one neighbor said. "You really showed her." Another added, "The fence is amazing, it's smart and beautiful at the same time." Karen, meanwhile, tried everything: letters to the HOA, polite conversations, and even subtle complaints about aesthetics. But nothing worked. The fence followed every rule to perfection, and everyone had seen it. Her influence had been neutralized without confrontation, and that stung more than anything else. Even the HOA, which had once seemed so controlling, remained silent. They could not find a single violation. Every line, every post, every hidden twist was within the rules. Karen realized too late, Protagonist's name had played by the rules, but they had also played smarter. And then came the most satisfying moment. One afternoon, Protagonist's name noticed Karen standing near her window, watching silently. For the first time, she was quiet. No complaints. No letters. Just observation. And that observation, long, tense, and filled with disbelief, was victory enough. The lakefront had been stolen, yes, but it had been reclaimed in a way that could not be undone. Not by rules, not by letters, not by gossip. Protagonist's name had transformed the lakefront into a place of privacy, creativity, and quiet triumph. Neighbors started coming by more often, chatting, laughing, and enjoying the lakefront in ways that hadn't happened before. The fence had not just blocked Karen, it had created a sense of community, admiration, and respect. People who once ignored the lakefront now saw it as a landmark, a clever reminder that patience and planning could win against control and intimidation. And as protagonist's name stood on the dock that evening, the sun setting behind the trees, they smiled. The lake shimmered in the warm light, calm and beautiful once more. Karen might have tried to steal their peace, but she had failed. The lakefront was theirs, protected, admired, and untouchable. Protagonist's name whispered quietly to the wind. Sometimes, the quietest victory is the sweetest. And sometimes, a little creativity can change everything. The neighborhood would never forget the lakefront fence. Karen would never forget it. And protagonist's name? They finally had their peace again, along with the satisfaction of having outsmarted the one person who tried to take it away. The lakefront, once threatened, was now stronger than ever, just like its owner.